So we are back. It's Tuesday, and that means it's Trial Review Tuesday. We are back with some more reviews. We had a great time last week and had a lot of great feedback from people and a lot of people submitting more videos for us. I'm going to turn this down. It's distracting to hear myself talk. And so we've picked some more videos to go through today. And Jennifer was on vacation last week, so we let her, enjoy her vacay and didn't make her log in last week, but she is back this week, so she will be analyzing some of these as well. Oh, we have a hello from Estonia, and we've got Westy Kalani. So people are joining on Facebook, and I think we are ready to get started. And we're actually going to start with a video that Jennifer is going to analyze. Jen, why don't you go ahead and share the screen and turn on your camera, and I will introduce this video. So
why don't you introduce Jennifer first? For people who are not familiar with Jennifer, newcomers to Band Dog Agility.
Sure, absolutely. So Jennifer is a national agility champion in the AKC at 16 inches with pink. Jennifer is a 3-time medalist in the individual class at FCI Agility World Championship, the most medaled American, I believe, in history for the FCI Agility World Championship. As Westminster champion to the last 2 years, and an instructor at Bad Dog Agility. She is also on our podcast, so if you've been listening to our podcast lately, you have been hearing her voice, and now you have briefly seen her face. We're going to go ahead and turn off our cameras to give all of the bandwidth to the videos. And take it away, Jen. This first handler that we have here is Rose. She submitted a video straight to the Facebook comments last week, and we don't know her dog's name, so if anybody knows it, they can put that in the comments. And I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let Jen take over.
Okay. Hopefully you guys can all hear me, and I did unmute myself, I think. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this run that Rose submitted. Now, this looks to be a fairly green dog just based on the course and some of the mistakes. So we're going to kind of take a look at a probably more novice level, starters level course with a relatively green dog and look at some mistakes and errors, some things that we want to work on both from the handling side of things, but also maybe some training issues that we can kind of pinpoint and send home for homework. So the first thing we're going to look at here is right off the start line. I think something that's often very overlooked is the setup position, not only the position, but also the distance to the first jump. So you're going to see the timers are right here at the plane of the first jump. That's when our time's going to start. So in order to achieve maximum efficiency, we want the dog starting the clock at full speed. So if we look at the distance we're seeing between the dog and that first jump, in my mind, that's a little bit tight. So you're not going to see a whole lot of distance there, which means the dog's going to struggle to get out of that stay and get a lot of momentum build up before starting the clock. But also look at the angle. So if we look at the angle here, the dog is set up to the right of the first jump, angled more towards the handler, and really from this angle, almost set up that when she releases could easily go around the first jump. So as we go ahead and play it forward, we're going to see one stride out of the sit before takeoff. So as she releases, good eye contact on release, there's one stride to get out of the sit and then immediately has to take off. So we're not talking a lot of power or a lot of sit over the first jump. So the first thing I would look at is backing the dog up further. But we do see a correction on that angle to the right that the dog makes to straighten himself up and get over the first jump. So the first jump itself wasn't a trouble spot. It wasn't a problem. But I want you to take a look at what happens here at jump number 2. So right as the dog releases off the start line and over jump 1, we're going to see Rose have a quick moment of disconnect. So she's watching the dog nicely here. So pay attention up here to her eye contact, looking over that left shoulder, having that left arm out. And right as the dog gets up, she looks forward and disconnects there. That combined with the angle that the dog was set up on the start line results in the dog landing and wanting to pull in towards her. Now, what I will say is gold star for having enough of a connection and enough eye contact to acknowledge that this mistake was starting to happen. And then you can see she kind of steps in, she pauses there. steps into the left to save it, but it's just a little bit too late at that point. So while it was a very good effort on the dog's part and Rose's part, it is resulting in a hit of the upright and a knock of the bar. So I think this first mistake really starts all the way back by trying to straighten up the start line on number 1. And I probably would lead out a little bit more just so that I have a little bit better spatial awareness of the opening of this course. So you can see Rose barely breaks the plane of that first jump, which meant that she had to kind of look up and see right there where jump 2 was. If she had let out a little further, say she got out to number 2 or even past it, if she was positioned between jumps 2 and 3, she would already visually know where those first 2 jumps are because she's looking back over that left shoulder to see the dog and the first 2 jumps. So I think a little of that disconnect is that spatial awareness to see where the jump is and then saving it. Probably something that an experienced dog, a seasoned dog that was maybe 6 or 7 years old would have been fine recognizing that jump 2 was there. We're just seeing that kind of baby dog mistake. Now coming around here, she saves that, but that does just put her probably a little further behind than where she wants to be because we're now looking at a front cross coming in here after number 4. That ends up being quite a bit late here. So right now, the 2 of them are kind of coming around next to each other. So right here, you can see they're side by side. Here's jump 4. All right. And Rose goes to put a front cross in after jump number 4 before this tunnel. But right here, dog gets ahead and is taking off, front feet are lifting right here. And she's just beginning that shoulder rotation and outside arm. So we combine the fact with she's not really far enough ahead for that front. And even if she wanted to try to reactively put it in, those turning cues would need to happen prior to the point of physical takeoff. All right. So the dog's already left the ground. Once the dogs leave off the ground, it's really hard for them to do any change to their jumping. Sometimes you'll see them try to switch leads in the air and result in a bar. But at this point, the takeoff and landing distance are determined. So as the dog comes over and clears the landing, Rose is now still back at the jump. The dog is behind her. So as they rotate through on this front cross, and sorry guys, I can't zoom up. It's just how the camera angle. I know you guys are kind of losing visual, but that's not my coach's eye. That's just how the run was filmed. You can see the dog's now quite a bit behind her. She's on the dog's line, and the motion combined with the fact that she's saying tunnel, the dog decides to just go for the obvious line, which is right behind her. So one of the things we're big at looking at is what is the line? Is the handler setting the correct line? Is the dog achieving the ideal line? So coming over this jump, we're going to have a small arc and then come right into the tunnel. So if we leave that line and go back, you can see Rose is coming through on that line right where the dog needs to be. All right. So the dog says, okay, I'll figure out another way to go to the tunnel, and ends up going right in behind. So in order to improve that front cross, what we want to start with is getting a little bit further ahead, which does take us all the way back to that turn on 2 to 3. So I think she, a little bit of the hesitation to support jump 2, put her behind. And then we want a more of a lateral send. So once the dog lands off of 2, handler wants to immediately be showing motion to the right to try to beat the dog, ideally breaking the plane of this jump before the dog takes off here on the takeoff side, to be able to come through, move off the dog's line and open up for that front cross. So coming through here, again, if we see what the dog's line is here, handler would want to be back across that line and coming through. So that kind of plant, pivot, push, accelerate out of that and then down into the tunnel. Now, coming out of the tunnel, the thing about straight tunnels that is a bit unique as we put a little tunnel focus in is a straight tunnel is what we consider a turning obstacle, meaning the handler's motion on the approach to the tunnel directly affects the exit of the tunnel, right? So if you're decelerating when the dog goes in, they're going to want to come out and turn. If you're accelerating and going straight, they're going to want to come out straight. So now the dog has entered the tunnel with the handler behind, and a location behind the dog is naturally a turning cue. So if we go forward here, when the dog exits, we immediately see that turn for the head check. And that is a result of really probably 2 things, primarily what the dog saw going into the tunnel, which was the handler behind. And this does appear to be a pretty novice dog. So this dog, lacking some mileage and experience, is kind of in the mindset of do an obstacle check-in, do an obstacle check-in, do an obstacle check-in, and really running obstacle to obstacle versus running the lines. So a little bit of this is going to be some experience and trying to get the dog to become a bit more obstacle focused, and as a handler thinking of running sequences and running lines, not necessarily obstacle to obstacle. Now, Rose does an absolutely fantastic job here of repeating the verbal and getting the arm extended. So she continues running forward. I think a lot of people want to stop when they see their dog curl towards them, which just then reinforces it. You said dog says, oh, I think you're falling behind and cueing a turn. Handler slows down. And the dog then is right. So Rose keeps running forward the best she can, get that arm out and is saying jump, jump, jump all along the way to get the redirect to the white. And then we see kind of the dog fall out of the camera here. I'm not sure if there's an off course out here or this is just the ring, but what you're going to see is the dog is not prepared for that turn. So look at the line here, right over the middle of the bar, jumping out in this direction as opposed to kind of jumping with a little bit more of a line or an arc to the left. So something might be out there drawing the dog's attention, but we're also not seeing a lot of lateral motion. So I like to pause right when the dog lifts. So, and say, okay, if I were to give you, a still photo of this right here, exactly what's in this, box, where does it appear that you're going? If you did not know the course, and actually we're going to come right back here because right here is when the dog's front feet are leaving. That is the last interaction the dog's front feet will have with the ground. And there's not a lot cueing the turn to the yellow, right? So we're still running ahead. And then the lateral motion starts here, but now we're already looking at the landing. So we wanted a little bit more lateral motion here. And really that's going to do two things. The lateral motion is going to cue the turn to the yellow. But as we start looking ahead, that lateral motion allows the handler to cut the corner and try to get downstream. So what happens here is, and I'm going to kind of sort of play this through in more live time to see the change in motion, right? Rose is running, and then she stops right here. Loses momentum, waits on the dog to come back, and now she's flat-footed and the dog has caught back up to her. And so coming out of the tunnel, we see once again that idea of handler falling behind and that location resulting in the dog thinking about a turn and creating that head check. So we see that head check quite significantly here, right? Coming out, turning, actually kind of more than just a head check, turning the body to check in and say, okay, where are we going? Rose doing another great job of running ahead and driving ahead with the arm extended and cueing the jump in the tunnel. But at that point, we're now reactively responding to the curl. So where we want to really think about going back on this is all the way back here, starting with this white jump. And if we kind of draw out the dog's line, if the dog has to go here, and then going to make the turn to come back in this direction, all right, kind of over that jump, handler cutting that corner, right? The hypotenuse is always greater than the length of the two sides. So as the dog comes up to the white, Rose cutting across this way, expecting him to go out there and then trying to get ahead. So that if we can get that head start, now eliminate that hesitation there, cue the turn better, eliminate the hesitation and get ahead, it's going to help this line. So we see the head check, the dog curling in, Rose can, again continuing to drive ahead, so reacting exactly appropriately, which is to continue with that forward motion, continue with the verbal, the arm extended, out over the jump and then to the tunnel. And then now we're going to see a really nice front cross here where the dog does no added strides and Rose does a great job of getting off the line. So the dog goes in the tunnel, she goes for this front cross. So we can watch the footwork here, plant, pivot, a little bit of a hop that we would like to try to get rid of. So if we just zoom in and we look at footwork only for a moment. So she's running. Here we're going to see the plant, try to pivot, and then watch this little hop backwards before she continues the rotation out to accelerate downstream. So footwork wise, we would try to get rid of that little hop and that little skip. But now let's take a look at the overall front cross and the motion and the location off the line. So if we sit here and say, okay, what is the dog's ideal path? We're talking the inside edge of this jump, roughly about the middle of the bar here because we're coming over to the tunnel. So if we draw that line, you can see, oops, sorry, I went backwards on that one. Let me go forward here. There we go. You can see Rose has done a great job of getting off that line. So she's clear of that line, setting a great path right out to the tunnel. So this is more what we're talking about with handling the lines versus the obstacle. And as you watch, you're going to see only one stride between these white jumps. So he lands, one stride, and take off. That is maximum efficiency, right? So we want as few strides as possible when we're looking for that extension in straight line. No added strides, great front cross, and drive into the tunnel. And then we're coming here around near the finish. We again see that head check, arm extended, redirecting out towards the jump with multiple jump verbals. Again, a combination of the young dog aspect and the falling behind. So I think as the verbals grow and the verbals get better, the dog hears the jump command while it's in the tunnel. It's going to come out of the tunnel looking for the jump. And then handler continuing to work to get ahead and drive ahead, dog chasing the handler versus if you guys fall behind, again, that location as a turning cue. But the last thing we want to look at with the handling on this tunnel is going to be this rear cross at a straight tunnel. And this goes back to the idea that these straight tunnels are turning obstacles. So if my dog goes into the tunnel, all right, seeing nothing but me on their left, at this point, the dog is traveling on their left lead. Okay. If they go into this tunnel thinking that the handler is on their left, they're going to come out of the tunnel bending to the left. So if we're going to do a rear cross, it's going to be important, just like a jump, that I show the lateral pressure towards the dog prior to the point of commitment. And that's prior to the point of, physical commitment to that tunnel. So we need to get the dog mentally committed. Then once we know they're kind of driving to the tunnel and going to the tunnel, we're going to apply that pressure before they physically commit, because once they make a physical commitment to the tunnel, it's all over. And the thing you got to remember about a tunnel is they're going to be losing visual of us and losing peripheral vision of us sooner than they would have jumped. So once their head breaks the plane of that tunnel, once they enter, they no longer can see anything we do reactively, a little bit different than a jump where they can hang on to us longer. So what happens here? Let's freeze at the point we feel like the dog's committed, which I would say is about right here. Right, that's going to be the last stride before going in. And we're just not seeing quite enough pressure to the right. So at this point, we want to be applying pressure towards the dog's path, be moving over for this next jump, which is this white wing over here. But Rose is staying more parallel to the dog. And then right here, you're going to see a big step behind the tunnel. But by now, the dog's already gone in. So right here, he's losing visual. So anything that happens at this point, he's not going to be able to see. So then coming out of the tunnel, we're going to see a spin here. So right there, coming out, turning to the left. Oh, there you are, Mom. And then pulling up to finish with these last two jumps, driving straight out over the finish, all dog on left. Again, very nice verbals on Rose's part, getting those out early, saying them often. But on that rear cross, we need to look on that timing of just being a bit earlier. So, again, remember that the dog loses peripheral earlier in the tunnel, but also, and I think a lot of people don't think too much about this, but a dog's commitment to a tunnel and a dog's commitment to a jump can be different. And if you have a dog who's very much a tunnel sucker, their commitment to a tunnel could be earlier than a jump, which means you need to be earlier on your timing. So if you're thinking, well, that's the same rear cross I would do at a jump, or that's the same timing I would do to rear cross a tire, well, the tunnel may be a more desirable obstacle. Therefore, the dog commits earlier, gets excited, ooh, yay, tunnel, and then commits and goes in a little bit earlier, and therefore you need to be earlier. So make sure, with these tunnel challenges, and we talk about today, and various discriminations, straight tunnels, that you keep in mind, not all commitment to all obstacles is going to be the same. So really, really nice run on this one. I think Rose had lots of excellent points, particularly for a young dog, working on getting her arm extended, continuing to drive. I see that happen a lot of times when people fall behind, they forget to keep driving forward, repeating the verbals. But we have a few handling things to work on, which would be some better sends and trust on the sends, timing of the rear cross, timing of the front cross. And then I think just a little bit with regard to some dog training aspects, getting a better verbal jump command would be one to really work on, improve those sends and allow Rose to get further downstream. So really pleased with this run. A little bit of feedback with regard to execution, a little bit of feedback with regard to some dog training that she can take home and work on.
All right, awesome, Jennifer. And we got a name for the dog. The dog's name is Tully. And Rose,
Tully, all right.
She says this was their third trial.
Awesome. Very good. Well, that was a great run for a third trial, because it looked like other than the bar at number 2, it would have been a Q. So very nice work on that.
Awesome. All right, Jennifer, you need to stop sharing your screen so that we can share ours. All right. And so now we're going to move on to our next handler. Our next handler is Jude, and she had a very specific question. So we're not doing her entire run. We're looking at one piece, and it's tunnel discriminations. And she mentioned in her email that this is something that gets her, on a semi-regular basis, that the dog needs to take the non-obvious tunnel entrance and instead takes the tunnel entrance right in front of them. So we're going to share our screen here.
And I'll be able to switch from one video to the other.
Yes, you'll just use this like normal. We're just sharing our iPad now. There we go. Okay, so there you go. You should everything should be good to go there.
All right. And is my video?
Yeah, let's turn your
my face.
No, I'm gonna turn your face off. Is what I'm going to do. There we go. Save that little bit of bandwidth.
All right. Yeah, the video seems to be a little bit laggy this week. Might be our internet. When we do the replay, we're going to try and insert some of the real live footage so it runs nice and smooth. But for now, I'm going to have to, Sarah tells me I need to scroll through this slowly. I can't even play it at real speed because it'll be too jumpy for you guys. So basically, she's coming here with her dog, 3 jumps and into a tunnel discrimination. You can see that her dog is headed for what turns out to be the wrong entrance here. So I'm going to zoom in here. I think I want to ask everybody right now at this moment. I have frozen the video. You can see the dog's front feet are in the air. The dog's approaching the bar. Take a look at the handler. Based on the position, that means where the handler is standing, the motion, which is the direction the handler is moving, right, and the direction the handler is facing, where do you think the dog should be headed next, right? We have 2 choices here for the tunnel, this one and this one. Which tunnel entrance do you think the dog is going to go to based on the handler? So when you're doing your own video analyses, this is something that I like to do. I think we talked about this last week. You're going to freeze the video at the takeoff point, and then rather than looking at what the dog is doing, you can look and see what the dog is doing. But I like to look at the handler and figure out what is the handler showing the dog. Because right at this moment, it's very obvious that the dog knows to take the jump. But the dog is also deciding, how am I going to take this jump? Am I going to take it in this direction, or straight? And they're going to make that decision based on what they see from the handler. All right. So do we have some feedback?
Yes, we've got 4 people saying right entrance, right?
Okay, so everybody agrees the dog should be headed to the right. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, and the dog goes into the right. Unfortunately, it turns out that that's not the entry the handler wanted. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more, and I'm glad we were able to show this video because you can see now that it doesn't seem very much like a mistake on the dog's part. I think when we look at this here, I think we can all agree the dog is doing what they believe is right. And so I think with respect to tunnel discriminations, this is the most important thing to understand. And it seems like a very obvious thing when we slow down the video and I show it to you. It seems so obvious that the dog is being told to go into the right side of the tunnel. But you will see, even in big national finals, even at international championship events, world team tryouts for any country that you want to choose, that dogs often are being driven into the wrong end by the handler, but kind of being blamed for it. The dog is being blamed for it. So this is an area where handling is really important. The system of cues you use is very important. And I'm going to switch now over to a demo that we did. When I saw this video yesterday, I said, okay, we need to set this up and work this out. This is going to be Sarah working her Border Collie Venture at 16 inches. How old is he now? He's like 7 or 8.
Something like that.
So yeah, he's something like that. So I set up just basically 2 jumps heading into a tunnel. The dog is headed straight into this end of the tunnel. All right. And you'll see that in a minute. But what I did here, if we look at the space between the jump and the tunnel, I made it 10 feet. 10 feet. Okay. So most dogs, especially big strided dogs, are going to land basically in the tunnel. All right. And so we're going to run the dog through a couple of different options. And this is what you need to be thinking about if you're having problems with tunnel discriminations. Think of all the different targets, all the different places that you need to go, and what your handling looks like for each of those decisions. So let's take a look here. The other thing I did was, this is not edited. I did a continuous running clip. I had Sarah do one, and then the next exercise, and then the next exercise. There's no cheating. If she didn't practice this beforehand, she hadn't done this exercise, I don't know, probably in years. The dog hadn't been worked very much in the last several months, right? just to show you that the handling is the most important thing here. Because I think one solution that people really reach for is pattern training on tunnel discriminations. And, that's not something that's going to work very well. So she's going to start by sending Venture around the cone here. So hopefully everybody can see that. And you can see it's a nice straight line. The dog is rocketing. The difference here between these two jumps is 20 feet, the distance. Okay. So you can see the dog really flattens out. And you can see that the dog lands, hits the ground just once, and is in the tunnel. Can everybody see that? So we are begging the dog to take this tunnel, okay? And at the takeoff point, which is right here, everything about Sarah's body and motion looks just like the handler we were looking at, right? They are driving the dog forward. And it doesn't matter if the handler's over here, or right next to the wing. So your position is not as important as your motion. Okay, so Sarah's going to drive Venture in there and then reward him and take him back to the start line. So on this next one, now that the dog is nice and patterned to go nice and straight into this tunnel that's just 10 feet after that jump, we're going to change the next obstacle for the dog. Okay, so here's the wrap again. Same approach. But now look at Sarah. And here, even the takeoff point has changed for the dog. See how much closer the dog is to the jump? This is a dog that is preparing for a turn. They're putting in an extra stride, right? And why? Let's take a look at Sarah. You can see she's not driving for the tunnel. She has, in fact, stopped, right? She's slowing down. Let's ignore the dog and try and keep our eyes here on Sarah. See how she's slowing down? And here she comes to a dead stop before the takeoff. Her feet are not moving forward anymore at all. So based on this, where do you think the dog should go? So I'll give you the obvious hint, it's not that, right? So how many of you think it's this? So you can put green square. And how many of you think it might be, let's take a look at some other targets here. We got a target here, and I guess she can come back toward this jump that's off screen. Do we have some guesses? Can people tell?
I think you've given it away a little bit.
Yeah, I think I rolled forward too much.
Too much
Okay.
rolling forward.
So once the dog is committed and is turning, and you can see that the dog is literally slicing the jump. You can see the dog's head. At no time does this dog look at the tunnel. Look at that. The dog is not even looking at the tunnel, and the dog is landing probably about 4 feet away from the tunnel. 4 feet, maybe 5 feet. But Sarah's already coming back in this direction. She has, in fact, done a decel stop and now front cross and is coming back down the line. And so the dog is going to ignore this. The dog is going to ignore this. The dog is going to ignore this. Okay? This obstacle, this off course got ignored from the deceleration. These other two got ignored from the front cross. Okay? So far, she's shown you two different possibilities. Straight into the tunnel, that's option one, and she's shown you how to do a full wrap. Now, how many of you would like to be able to do a full wrap at speed, tunnels just 10 feet away from the jumps? I'm telling you right now that most high-level competitors can't do that. But this is something that's relatively easy to teach. Everybody can do it. And once your dog has mastered it, tunnel discriminations are not going to be difficult for you. You're not going to have anxiety about it. And your dog will pretty much never go in the wrong end. Okay, let's take a look now. Here's the takeoff point. You see that the dog is further back. And if we take a look at Sarah, she's running forward. So where do we think she is trying to put the dog? Red circle or green square?
You gotta wait for Facebook to catch up.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna
get some guesses.
I'm just gonna assume everybody got it right.
I think that's good.
I had her test the dog, by putting the dog straight back into the tunnel, right? I don't want you to think that we're patterning the dog. So I said, okay, hey, go put the dog straight back into that tunnel again. So we rocket the dog straight into the tunnel, and then we reward the dog. Now we're going to do the threadle.
All right, everybody gets red. They got it right. They got it right.
Everybody got it right.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And when you're teaching the skill, this is what I mean by patterning. What I'm showing you right now, what Sarah was doing, is anti-patterning. Right? We tried to pattern it in the wrong direction. We tried to drive the dog in the straight line, put them right in the tunnel, bring the tunnel all the way up to the jump, and to test them and to dare them to take that tunnel. Right? This is the level that we train at, and this is the level that you can train at as well. So watch this. I'm going to argue that she uses a blend of two cues. She's slowing down a little bit, but not as strongly as the deceleration, and we get an equivalent response. The dog takes off closer than the full extension, but not as close as the full wrap. You see the dog kind of chooses a middle takeoff point. And now Sarah's doing something interesting. With our way of handling, we use the opposite arm to cue threadling. So you can see her arm. I'm pointing to her finger here. Her upper body is rotated toward the dog. And the dog knows instantly, without looking back at her. You can see the dog is looking forward and not looking back at the handler. The dog knows instantly, before the dog even crosses the bar, that they're not taking this and they are taking this. You see the dog goes immediately in. So I want you to see how close the dog is to the off course here. The dog is only about 2 feet away. Right? Remember, the dog is landing almost in the tunnel. And now the dog threadles in the correct way. And then gets the reward here. All right, so that's the end of this demonstration here. But that's what we're going for when we're doing these tunnel discriminations. Now, we happen to use throttle handling to work it out. So right arm and driving forward means take this in. Opposite arm and slowing down
and a verbal
right, means throttle. Okay, and one thing that you can do, Sarah did slow down a little bit but not too much, because sometimes when we throttle we still want the ability to keep moving forward. Let's say the dog needs to go this way and then come out to this part of the course. Sarah doesn't want to come to a dead stop here. She wants to be able to keep moving in this direction to catch up with the dog after the tunnel. But if you don't need to do that, I like to use, especially with beginning dogs who are not that strong at reading the throttle cue yet, the verbal or the opposite arm, you can use a strong deceleration cue. And that is something that in general doesn't require too much teaching. Now, if your dog is a total tunnel sucker, it's going to require teaching. And the way you teach it, you definitely don't want to start here at 10 feet. We will start tunnels back 30 feet, even 40 feet, and then bring them in. All right, and then go back and forth between taking the tunnel, not taking the tunnel, taking the other end of the tunnel. But threadling is a skill that has to be taught and has to be taught from the ground up. I just want to show you how I think most handlers are doing it. You don't necessarily need to do it with the opposite arm, but you do need some kind of verbal cue, and the timing has to be well before the takeoff of the jump. Otherwise, you are too late. All right.
So one question that we have is, what's the verbal? So my verbal for throttle is here. So if we play the video, you would hear me say, over here, here, tunnel. I might repeat it depending on the response that I get or how much distance there is. So it's usually at least 2 hears. So here, here, tunnel. But the keys that I wanted to point out, the one thing, and someone already pointed it out, but my dog does not look at me. If your dog looks all the way at you, they are not. They look past the correct choice to you, and you have to redirect them back to the correct choice. You have actually held your throttle too long. So I just want my dog to have the information to pull off of the line that he's on to the new line, and no more. I don't want to pull him off of the correct line. Yeah. And
Pat wants to know if a smaller dog can see the opposite raised hand or it needs to be lower. I don't think it's too important where your hand is, because even the biggest dog and the smallest dog, the difference is maybe like 1 foot, and people are at least 5 feet tall usually. So you're looking, so if this is a 5-foot person and you have a 1 foot tall dog and the biggest dog is a 2 foot tall dog, the difference is like 12 inches. The view of the hand is like the angles are going to be very, very slight, and the farther away you are from the dog, the less it matters. So I don't think that's important. What I do think is important is that the dog is not always just looking for your hand. This is an entire upper body presentation. So once the dog reaches like this skill level, Sarah doesn't need to turn too much, because in my opinion, the dog's going mostly on the verbal.
Yes.
Right? But when you are first starting, we are giving ourselves back cramps, muscle cramps in our back, because we're trying to twist toward the dog so much to show him the arm and the upper body and getting it done early. I've literally had cramps in my back. But as the dogs get better, they become more and more reliant on the verbal cue.
Go ahead.
Over, tunnel. Good boy. Over. Good boy. Over, tunnel. Good boy. Over. Here. Tunnel. Over. Good boy. Very good. Okay, and there's one thing that I wanted to point out in the original video, and that is that I think that we do see some, let me back it up here a little bit. We do see Rose having a slight difference. So what Rose does is very typical, which is she is pulling slightly to get this into the tunnel. And I think that that's very typical for people when they have tunnel discriminations. And the reason that we did the demo, was that we wanted to show you an alternative handling that is more different. So the question is, how different is this slight pull when the angles are very small versus running forward as the dog commits to the jump? The difference in what the handler is doing is very, very small when you're just using degree of pull to determine the tunnel entrances. And that's why these can be so hard. And we see tunnel discrimination so much in agility that it becomes a worthwhile specialized skill to have a more distinct cueing system for one end versus the other.
Yeah, if there's one take home, again, the easiest thing to train would just be to stop. So right here, as her dog is taking off, even though she's way over here, I would just stop. If I'm the handler, I would just stop there. And what's going to happen is the dog will put in a little extra stride and start to turn as if to come back to the handler. As soon as the dog is turned and looking towards you, then you can redirect the dog to the tunnel. Now that's not a trained throttle cue. You're just getting by with deceleration and then cueing the dog to the tunnel, which they can't really see. So you have to have kind of a way to turn the dog away from you, back away from you, so they don't spin like this. You want them to go like this. But that's a nice crutch. It's a temporary fix, something you can use in your trial this weekend. Long term, you want to train the throttle cue. Okay. For our last dog, I thought this was a really good one. This handler lives in Malaysia. And these videos, she submitted a couple videos, are from the FMBB. This is the Malinois, the Shepherds World Championship for agility. And so you're going to see international style courses here. This dog is really fantastic. Obviously very highly trained. And we're going to take a look at a couple of spots here that I think are interesting. We're not going to talk about every little thing. Here she opens up with a front cross to move to get out ahead. She puts in a very nice blind cross to get the dog over. And here we have the use of the opposite arm. So when you have these international handling challenges, and you're going to have elements of like this at national level competitions, like Westminster, like the AKC finals, what we have here is an approach to a jump from the side, perfectly from the side. So how does the dog know which side to go on? That's where I like to use my arm. So left arm is going to mean go this way, right? And then the opposite arm is a throttle move, and that's going to pull the dog this way. So that's what's going on here. And you can see the dog come in and then come up and over, but take the bar, okay? So this is a dog, when I look at the understanding of the throttle cue, I would say it's basically half trained. The dog knows when they see the opposite arm that they need to come in, okay? But the dog does not automatically look for this jump. So in a highly trained dog, like you saw Sarah and Venture doing the demo, anytime the throttle arm comes, this is a very fine distinction, but it's an important one. The throttle cue does not mean come to Sarah until she releases to some other obstacle. That's not what it means. The throttle means there's a choice. Don't take the first choice, but definitely take the second choice. Okay? So if Sarah had run this with Venture, you would see Venture come in without even looking or head checking and immediately take this part of the jump. Okay? So with more experience, the dog is going to know that this jump is coming, that they're supposed to do this backside. Because right now her throttle is broken up into two parts. Part number one, come to me when I show you the opposite arm. And the dog did that. Part number two, go away from me, but on my arm. Do you see that? And so right here, the dog should already know, but the dog can't know until the arm goes up. Now she puts the arm up. Now the dog's like, oh no, I got to throw myself up quick. There's just not enough space. And then we get the bar down, okay? And so we want to advance our throttle understanding from the dog and the handler from a two-step process to a one-step process. Okay, this is a nice spot to think about deceleration. This is the moment of takeoff. So you can see that the dog's front feet are up in the air now. The handler is still driving forward, moving forward, and so the dog is going to go long. Here, the handler is slowing down, but the dog is already landed, right? The dog needed this information. The handler needed to look like this earlier. How much earlier? About half a second earlier. So you can see that the handler didn't have to become magically faster or get further ahead. She just needed to start decelerating 0.4 of a second sooner. And that's how close we're talking about. We're talking about you doing your moves a couple tenths of a second sooner, and then suddenly you're going to get a really great turn instead of a really wide turn and poor approach to the weaves, right? So in terms of handling, she really drove the dog toward that tunnel. And it's no coincidence that there's a tunnel there. The amount of space between the tunnel and the broad jump is just right. So now the dog realizes the mistake, comes back, gets in the weaves.
Heroic.
Really great effort there. Okay. All right. This is the next spot I wanted to talk about. The dog exits here on this side of the jump. We want the dog to go this way. And this is a very common spot. And what has happened here is the handler has opened up space between her and the jump. So usually instead of being positioned over here on slice approaches like this, I like to be over here. This forces the dog through this very narrow window. So the dog's going to come out, they're going to round up, and they're definitely going to take this jump. But if I separate myself from the jump, you're going to leave this space. And then all the judge has to do is put something juicy behind it, like maybe a tunnel, right? And so you're suddenly going to see the dog round out and then really think about taking this tunnel. The other thing that you want to consider is the cue coming from the arm. But you can see how the dog rounds out and goes this way. In this case, she wants the dog to go on and take the tunnel. So this is a spot that's pretty interesting because if the dog slices, it takes you where you don't want to go. And so getting a rounded approach is more desirable for the dog. Okay, here we're handling with our serpentine handling, and what we want to do is pretend that this tunnel exit is a jump. And so this is what we're looking at here. That's what's desirable. You can see she's bringing the dog in with this opposite arm, but now she doesn't have a very good way because of her position being over here instead of over here. There's no good way to turn the dog away from her except with a verbal. And so you see the dog almost slip and fall right here. And we're going to get a wide turn instead of a slicier, faster turn. So again, on serpentines, when the dog is taking off for this jump over here, I like to be standing here looking at my dog through the upright. You're going to see a lot of handlers try and give their dog this landing space, which is important because if she's standing here, the dog will be more likely to shorten up and then drop that bar. But the other way to get out of that landing space is to be over here. So instead of being over here, you can be over here. And now when you move, like I showed you after the weave pulls, if you're standing here, now you create this narrow cone for the dog to come in and then slice this jump. So you can definitely tighten up that turn. And this is pretty interesting too. I think definitely with the dog slicing this way, they're on a line that's going to take them away from the correct tunnel. So I would also do a throttle cue. But the question is, if you're doing a throttle cue to bring the dog in here, if I'm stuck over here, what if I wanted to bring my dog all the way over here? What cue would I be using then, right? And if I'm also going to use the throttle cue there, then now I have a conflict, right? I have a problem with the way that I handle this situation here, right? I think the obvious solution is, and you would have to do this every time, is throttle always means do this. And for the other tunnel, I'm always going to front cross to drag the dog through here and get there. So I have to make sure I'm able to get to that front cross. If I'm too far behind the dog, obviously I need to do something else. We teach a different bypass cue so we can bring the dog past open tunnels and then use the throttle to get them in over here. That's a little more advanced handling concept. But on tough courses like these, where you have multiple targets, multiple choices, you always got to be thinking not just what is the handler doing to do the correct thing. What would you do if it was this? What would you do if she had to come take the dog walk over here and do this and go take the dog walk and not take either of the tunnels? How is that handling going to look different? All right, I'm going to move this along. Here we have some awkward spacing. The dog takes off for the viaduct, which is fine. And you can see that based on where the dog lands, the dog does not quite have enough room to get in one more stride, right? The dog, see how far away the dog lands? There's really not too much room to get in one more stride. Unfortunately, the dog needs to put in one more stride, but instead tries to hero jump it and it smacks down. In my opinion, the presence of this jump, which is definitely very close, and you'll see why it's very close, it's because the judge had created a backside here and so felt that there was no danger to the dog by putting the two jumps close. But in my opinion, if the dog, even for a second, thinks that they may be taking this, they know that there's only enough room to hit the ground once here. And so they kind of have to back calculate what they're going to do. And if they don't do a lot of jump shoot work, this is going to be a problem. So you can see that the dog comes around here. So to me, that's probably just the dog's inexperience in that kind of situation. I don't love the setup there as course design. Okay, here the dog takes the tire. And this is a beautiful dog. I love this dog. And then it looks like,
I think this is very similar to our other spot where the dog is really headed for the side. She's using the opposite arm cue, but that has pulled the dog towards her, and the dog does not have that understanding that it always means take the jump. And so with the handler not there to support the kind of push back to the jump, you get a bypass.
That's right. So that's a very common spot. Here she pushes to the backside. And here she's going to have a very nice move. This is like you'll see a lot of people using the in cue. Lap turns can look like this.
Threadle to the backside.
Yeah, threadles can look like this. So it depends, but here she's using the same arm. So for me and Sarah, we're going to threadle, and so we're going to use the opposite arm. So if we have our left arm out, even if we're slowing down, that means take the jump and wrap this way. If we want the dog to go the other way, let me put that in a different color for you. If we want the dog to threadle in and then take that jump, we're going to do a threadle and then rear cross with the opposite arm. And so when I see this and I say, okay, the dog responds to this cue very nicely, and there's a very tough trap right there on the turn. A lot of dogs will go into that tunnel. If the dog is responding like this here on the same arm, then what are we using our opposite arm for? Not that either one is incorrect, but there's this idea of consistency in all situations, so that the same cues mean the same things anywhere they're used in any situation. So it's very, very clear for the dog. So that's kind of the one thing that I would look at for this handler. I would be very interested in how they're doing threadles and backsides. And then I would just make that handling very, very consistent, and try and position the handler in the beginning to always be at the next jump to kind of shape and direct the dog's path. But then also I would incorporate a lot of training where the handler is falling behind and she can direct the dog from behind. And that's where it's very useful, I think, for a lot of people who don't have the foot speed to really keep up with their dogs, who can be quite fast. All right. Okay. And I'm going to stop that one there. And I think Sarah wanted to talk about one other point.
Yeah, let's talk about.
It's going to be the same dog on a different course.
And we're just going to fast forward to one part of this course that I thought was very interesting and falls in line with our theme of tunnels. First of all, just gorgeous handling all through here, an amazing weave pull entry. So let's just give props there. All right, so now here she is exiting the weave pulse. Gorgeous work. Does a blind cross. Has already completed the blind cross as the dog is exiting. And now we have this jump. And now let's think back to our other course where we talked about where we're using threadles and why we would use threadles in certain spots. So at this point, with this dog, with this stride, the dog's on a line like this. The dog's line from the weaves over this jump requires a deviation to get this into the tunnel. So the handler is a little lateral here, and I expect she's calling tunnel, but the dog is going to go to the far end of the tunnel. And this is an ability that at the highest levels, and especially in overseas, you want to have the ability to send the dog to this tunnel. If this were the correct tunnel entrance, this is the optimum path to get there. You wouldn't want to shorten their stride to bring them this way. You would want to let them go with all that speed and momentum and go there. So we do want to have the ability to send our dogs to the opposite side. But what this creates is a tunnel discrimination, but it is reversed from what we're used to. We would be used to seeing the tunnel looking like this with a tunnel discrimination. And here it's inverted the opposite way. But it is still a tunnel discrimination. And if we look at the dog's line, the obvious tunnel entrance is actually that far tunnel entrance, and the altered line, non-obvious, is this tunnel entrance. So this is a spot where I would use threadle handling to bring my dog to the correct tunnel entrance. Someone's drawing now. Apparently my tunnels aren't as.
So if we drag this end around here, right, and we did that, now it becomes more obvious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're driving the dog toward that tunnel, except to make it straight, we just dragged the tunnel and made it straight.
Exactly. So this is a case where you have to look at your dog's line, where they're coming from, and evaluate this. But at speed, and you know, if you draw a line like the plane of this tunnel, you're really only talking about a few feet away from the jump. The dog basically lands past the tunnel, and that means they have to come back to it. And so that's going to be the key to me, that I need to be considering a threadle cue. And especially if I need to run hard to get to the next part of the course, that running hard is another cue to go to this end. So if I want to be able to run hard, but get this entrance and not be dependent on hanging back or using a lot of deceleration to create that turn, that's where I'm going to use that trained threadle cue. And the higher trained it is, the less you have to slow down. You can run as hard as you want this way, and as long as you turn your shoulders into your dog, call here, here, you're going to be able to alter this line and still put yourself in a great position. So I thought that was an interesting spot, because you basically get the dog running around the backside, and it doesn't seem like that would be the obvious choice, but when you look at the dog's line, it actually is the obvious choice for the dog. All right, I think we are right here at an hour. We've covered our 3 handlers. Reet says, I believe she was probably there. She says that was the team jumping course, the course that we just looked at.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So we kind of had a variety of handlers today in terms of style and experience level, and we'll be doing this again next week. So for those of you who want to see us look at your videos, send them on. We'll be selecting a couple more videos to do next week.
Yeah, 2 more weeks we'll be doing this, and this Thursday we're gonna have a special presentation as well. That's gonna be how you can identify areas for improvement in agility. For me, at least, I really think of the summer. There's not really any big competitions because it's so burning hot. Everybody does stuff in the spring and the fall, all the big events, championship events, Westminster, nationals, all that kind of stuff. So summer is kind of a dead time for big events, and it's really hot, can't train as often. So summer is really a good time to figure out where you're weak, where you're strong, what you need to work on to get ready for the fall season. So we're going to be walking you guys through that, so you can do that for your own dogs, instructors, for your own students, and so on. So don't miss that. We'll be sending out some emails about that as well.
And if you're not on our mailing list and you want to make sure that you don't miss the next Trial Review Tuesday or this Thursday presentation, just go to baddogagility.com and you'll see a spot on the sidebar for signing up for the email list. And then you could also send us your video for review once you get your welcome email. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. A special thanks to all the people from overseas where it's late at night and they're staying up to watch our presentation. So thank you very much, guys. We'll see you next week.